When we verify identities, it's like these are like proofs, and so there are two ways to go about these. One would be to start with one side and make it look like the other. The other way would be to work on both sides at the same time and make them look like each other. So basically, it just depends on what the two sides look like. A lot of this is just going to be, it's going to be trial and error. It's going to be you look at it and you try something, and then maybe you have to try something else. So let's just look at one and let's talk about what's happening. So the first one maybe that we might want to look at might be example 4 on page 564. So let's look at that one. It says secant. Oops. Let's make that look a little bit better for you. Secant squared theta minus 1 over secant squared theta equals sine squared theta. Now, when I look at this problem, I look at the two sides and I say to myself, which side is more complicated? And the more complicated side, I try to work on and see if there's anything that I can do. And the first thing that I notice is this top, secant squared minus 1. If you look at your cheat sheet, it happens to be one of the Pythagorean identities. And so secant squared theta minus 1 is the same thing as tangent squared theta. So that's the first thing that I see. And I usually draw a line down the middle to keep me from bleeding over into the other side. Now I have a fraction. I don't have any subtraction or addition. So what I usually try to do then is I try to write everything in terms of sine and cosine if I can, especially since this side is already in terms of sine. I would try to write the left side in terms of sine. And I know that tangent is the same thing as sine over cosine. And so that means that tangent squared is the same thing as sine squared over cosine squared. So basically, if you had tangent 4 theta, that would be the same thing as sine 4 theta over cosine 4 theta. Tangent squared is the same as sine squared over cosine squared. So that goes over and carries on over, and those identities carry. So this is tangent divided by secant squared. So this is sine squared theta over cosine squared divided by secant squared. And secant is the same thing as 1 over cosine. So secant squared is the same thing as 1 over cosine squared. And when you divide with fractions, it's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So this would be the same thing as sine squared theta over cosine squared theta times cosine squared theta over 1. Those two things cancel, and we're left with the same thing on both sides. And so your final step, when you look at these, your final step is just to write the two equal to each other. So this thing on the left and the thing on the right should be the same thing when you see it.